Hello, Nerd Universe, and welcome to the 4th episode of Insert Nerd Topic Here. We're going to be talking all about vampires.
This is from our new series called Species Awareness, where we're going to break down and discuss all the different types of species, from sci-fi movies, fantasy movies, TV shows, books, anything, you name it. If you want to tweet us an idea for a species for us to cover, you can tweet us. You'll hear more about that at the end of the podcast if you are interested in contacting us about that.
We have so much to talk about today because vampires, especially recently, are everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know where the big hype came from, but from, I don't know, like True Blood to the Vampire Diaries all the way back to Buffy, we have so many different topics to cover. I'm going to be real, I haven't seen Buffy, but I do know that there's a new boom. Like the old boom was like where the Vampire Diaries came in and all that stuff, but now we have newer shows, and it's even going into books. More books are coming out with vampires as well.
Yeah, I think the most vampire heavy content is in TV shows, though. We have a big list of TV shows that we're looking at today. They all range in different types with their vampires. All the vampires are a little different in pretty much every show.
I do have an opinion, though, of what I think is the quote-unquote correct vampire.
What is it?
Well, we'll get to that in the end. I'm going to go ahead and talk about some of the TV shows and books I've read, and then I'll tell you my opinion.
All right.
As we come up with a list of all of the things that were vampire-y, I realized that I don't know if I just haven't seen that many vampire movies, or if I just can't remember them, but I only have like 2 listed that I've actually seen, which is weird. Because you'd think, with all the vampire shows that are out, that they'd have more.
Right. No, there's definitely there definitely are not many movies regarding vampires that at least have come out that are decent. And the same with video games, too. There really aren't that many that highlight vampires in any way.
I guess that's just how it is.
Yeah, I know there's a gazillion TV shows, and we're going to be talking about
we can dive right into those TV shows.
Let's go for it.
So I think what I've noticed is that I would say, for the most part, vampire shows are predominantly for women. I don't know. I feel like they're just female pandering, because it's all like, the sexy guy comes in and sees the mortal girl, and they all fall in love for their eternal whatever. Mm-hmm. And it's something. My favorite of those is probably The Vampire Diaries.
You have watched it many times and cried many times.
4 or 5 times all the way through, and I've cried at least 3 times during every watch through, and I always know when it's coming up.
By the way, if any of these shows that we mention, or TV shows or movies or anything, even the books, if you have not seen them, go do that first. Because most of these aren't super recent, but we are going to dive into some recent content that might, be considered a spoiler warning for those who haven't seen it. So make sure you go see any of the things we're going to talk about. We will give you a little heads up.
Yeah, we'll usually say like what we're about to talk about.
Yeah, for sure.
But for the most part, I think what we have is older things, and then I have some recommendations of newer things that are out that I think you should see.
Yes.
That I haven't even seen. So I have them on my watch list. So you should have them on yours. Because my opinion matters, right? So with the Vampire Diaries, we also had the originals. And then after the originals, they have their spin-off of Legacies. And they just, I don't know how that show just managed to have such a big boom. But I do know that the Vampire Diaries came from a book series.
Yeah.
They were a book series by L.J. Smith for a long time. And they just decided to make the show based on it. And they did a really good job, because the show, I think, is better than the books. I know I said that was a rare thing I say, but, it's not better, okay? It's just different, and what they did differently is good.
Yeah. No, I like it when shows do a different take on things, and it actually warrants it for the better.
Like a lot of it's the same content. It's just like they might have changed the appearance to make it more broad of the diversity.
Yeah, we talked about this with The Magicians last week too. It's the same principle,
and that's good stuff to do. I think it's really good to have some diversity, especially nowadays. when like a lot of these things came out, they didn't have the big push for diversity, and now these shows have the opportunity to make those really good books and change that and make it diverse. And that's really neat to me. And so I love the Vampire Diaries. I think it might be my favorite of the vampire shows. I think it might actually be the first vampire show that I watched ever. There's a lot of other shows that have it though, but I think I would say Vampire Diaries is the one with like, because they have the fangs and they have the. I know
They have the fangs.
not all vampires have fangs, and that's important. But fangs are different.
At least not all vampires have fangs as they are portrayed on TV.
Not all vampires are created equally.
Interesting.
So, yeah, think about that for a little bit. But with the Vampire Diaries, I especially like how they do it because they have fangs that are on the canines. And then when they get, bloodlusty, they get this around their eyes where it's just like you can see that it's like a vicious kind of thing. Like they're predators. And I think a lot of people forget that when they're watching Twilight.
Yeah. And you see that in True Blood as well, where they have the ability to like shoot out their fangs. I think do they do that on Vampire Diaries too?
They can, but I feel like it's not as aggressive and as forceful as it is in True Blood.
In True Blood is definitely noticed. If you watch our little trailer for this episode, the very first scene is from True Blood. It's with Jessica and oh shoot, I forget his name.
I can't remember
the other guy. Their fangs are definitely visible, as you can see from
They're
that
also
scene.
closer to the front.
Yeah, they're actually on like the two teeth on this. I don't know my teeth. They're the teeth on the sides of the front two.
Yeah.
So they're much more prominent. But I think in True Blood and the Vampire Diaries, you definitely see their emotion change to bloodlust pretty easily.
You can tell where the switch, so-called, is flipped.
Yeah, you can tell when they're craving blood.
Speaking of the switch, that's something that the Vampire Diaries has that actually nothing else has.
Really?
Where, if they feel like enough guilt or something, they can just, quote unquote, flip the switch.
Yeah.
And be not caring, not just do whatever.
Yeah, with some of these shows, most of the time it isn't controllable for them. But in the Vampire Diaries, you're right, it is actually completely controllable.
You could, yeah. There was some speculation throughout the series about whether or not that switch actually exists after a while, because apparently it was said at some point that that's only for newbie vampires, but who knows, Maybe it's different vampire to vampire. And we see in the originals that they don't talk about their switch, but they kind of do have one at the same time. So, I don't know. Then they're the original first vampires in the entire Vampire Diaries world. So, I think that's really neat. And I do like what they do with True Blood. I like that the fangs are more prominent, but I think it's still a little weird placement-wise in the mouth. I don't know why.
Yeah, I think it's just because they're not actually where your canines are.
I think my mind just does not comprehend that difference.
Your canine teeth are one step over from where they are in True Blood. So.
Now, if we want to get real crazy, if you've watched Supernatural, their vampires are all fang.
They have like every single tooth turning into a fang.
Super spiky fang, and the only way to kill them is to cut their head off. The only way.
No wooden stakes, no garlic, no none of that?
Cut the head off.
Oh, interesting.
Only way. And I like that because it's kind of original. Sort of. I mean, I know they always have like some way to kill vampires, but where did the wooden stake come from?
Yeah, and we see the wooden stake being used in most of these shows, I would say.
The majority, yeah.
Majority of these shows have at least, maybe not necessarily you die because of a wooden spike, but you at least can be actually hurt by it. Because I know in What We Do in the Shadows and True Blood, if you get hit with a wooden spike, you're dead. Like, regardless of where it hits you, you turn into a pile of goo, basically, I think.
It has to be through the heart.
Well, but in those shows, they get stabbed in various places and they just die.
I think it depends where it's hitting.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think if they get shot in, like, the arm that they're going to die. They're probably going to be okay. But if it's, like, some serious part of your body, yeah.
No, definitely. Yeah, and with What We Do in the Shadows, which is the most comedic vampire show ever.
It takes all the stereotypes.
It takes them all extremely seriously, but in a hilarious way.
I love that show. I'm glad I started watching it. I'm glad I got you into it.
Oh, yes, you did.
And this is one that's not female pandering. You can watch it, whoever you are.
Oh, absolutely.
At any time.
Yes.
As long as you're of age.
Yeah, of course. It is obviously most of this stuff is mature content, as vampires are in general pretty violent creatures.
Warning, gore.
Yes.
Blood and violence.
Yes, gore, blood, violence. A lot of things go along with this. So, but with What We Do in the Shadows, with like all the vampire stereotypes, with the wooden stake, with the garlic, with the cross, with the
sun,
the cross, the Bible, the sun. But yeah, basically, whenever they set foot in a church, it's bad.
Yeah, because we see Nandor getting kind of burned when he walks into a church, and
they they have the ability to turn into bats. Which a lot of the other vampires are lacking. I mean, they've got speed abilities and other supernatural abilities, but they can they literally transform in What We Do in the Shadows.
In What We Do in the Shadows, though, they can also turn into other animals. Because like we heard that Nadia turns into a cat, and we saw Nandor turn into, was it a dog?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's interesting. I think that's a little different from the normal vampire, but I like that they have where the sun actually matters in this show, because for like the Vampire Diaries, they have like the rings.
Well, they have the daylight rings.
The daylight rings that keep them from getting burned in the sun. True Blood also, sun's a big bad.
Well, yeah, except for Sookie's blood. Apparently, if they drink Sookie's blood, they can actually go in sunlight.
For a little bit.
For a brief amount of time.
It depends how much you have.
Yeah, but that's because she's a fairy, so there's nothing,
It's different.
She's special. But yeah, I enjoy the What We Do in the Shadows vampires the most for me. Not just because it's a hilarious show, but I just think that is the most stereotype vampire that we're used to. And with the whole glamoring thing that they do, or they don't do glamoring, they do they call it hypnotizing.
Hypnosis, glamour, compulsion, you pick your word.
They're all called different things, but it's loosely the same thing in all of them. But I like when they do the double hypnosis and it mushes their brain.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's one of the newer episodes, so. Yeah. But it's still really interesting, and I like the submit to my dark power.
Submit, yes. If you haven't watched What We Do in the Shadows, go do it now. It's directed by Taika Waititi, who directed some of the Marvel movies like Thor Ragnarok. He's an executive producer on the show, and it's absolutely hilarious.
There's also a movie by the same name.
Yeah. That's
really similar to the show. I haven't seen it, but I've heard it's really good, and it's definitely on my list. Another show that I like is Hemlock Grove, which I don't think a lot of people talk about because it's a Netflix original. It's only got 3 seasons, and the first season was the best season. And the vampires in there don't have fangs. They can like dislocate their jaws.
That's creepy.
And just like snap down, and it's horrifying.
Yeah, that's really creepy.
It's really terrifying to see, but
I much prefer the fangs.
But I mean, anybody that's got Skarsgård at the end of their name is going to be attractive as a vampire.
Oh boy.
I'm just saying, it's just how it is. It's just how they are. Even in Doctor Who, they have vampires. I don't even.
Yeah, this is the one episode with Matt Smith as the Doctor. It's the Vampires of Venice, and they've got the really long. They have all the teeth or fangs kind of vibe.
Kind of like Supernatural.
They look a little bit more like a monster, like a weird thing has inhibited their brain.
No, I feel like vampires are technically monsters.
Well, yes, they are monsters, but I'm saying just looking at their mouth, they've got these. They're almost yellow.
Yeah,
it's pretty gross. But yeah, there are vampires in Doctor Who. I don't know. I don't remember if they exactly follow all the stereotypes or
I don't
anything.
either, but I know that they're there.
Yes.
There's a lot of shows that are newer and older that I haven't seen that are also vampires. V Wars with Ian Somerhalder, which he plays Damon in the Vampire Diaries. Love him. I need to see that. He doesn't play a vampire though in V Wars, which is interesting. But one of my best friends, Caitlin, she was on the show a while back. She said that it was really good. So I accept her advice about vampires. She and I both love them. I've never seen Buffy.
No, I haven't either.
I've never seen Nosferatu. I've never seen the new Dracula that's on Netflix.
Yeah.
Which is like 3 episodes, but I'd like to. And funny enough, when I was doing research for this podcast, turns out the show called The Strain is actually vampires.
Really?
And I watched like the first few episodes, and I don't know if it was just I wasn't paying attention very well or something else, but I could have sworn that it was zombies.
It just by the title, it sounds like a zombie franchise.
Because they make vampirism more like a disease. And so I just think that's really interesting, and I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't been looking it up.
Yeah.
There's a lot of movies, kind of.
Kind of.
I would say movies that Twilight's obviously the champion of vampire
Do we
movies.
want to talk about the Twilight vampires?
The Twilight. So everybody knows, I think, a little bit about Twilight.
I mean, I have never seen Twilight, but yet I know that there's a certain stereotype about Twilight. And I know that, you know, it just, yeah. It is what it is.
I'm not gonna lie, I liked it. I liked the books more, but the movies aren't necessarily bad. It's just, it's so hilarious to see vampires sparkling in the sun
instead of burning up in the sun like they usually do.
It's a little messed up. It's very wrong, and it cracks me up. I'm not gonna lie. So.
Yeah.
I really liked the comedy movie Dark Shadows with Johnny Depp in it.
Yes, that's a good movie.
That was really good. Again, stereotypes for vampires. Definitely. Burning in the sun, being able to...
Sleeping in a coffin.
Sleeping in a coffin. Oh, that's another What We Do in the Shadows thing. They sleep in coffins.
Yes.
Yeah, and I feel like we don't get a lot of those stereotypes. I think a lot of people try to push away from the stereotypes, but this in particular, this does well.
Yeah.
I have ton of books to talk about.
Go for it.
So there's a lot of books that turn into shows or turn into movies. So like The Vampire Diaries or Hemlock Grove or Vampire Academy or Twilight or Discovery of Witches and Shadowhunters, which is City of Bones by Cassandra Clare. All of these things have vampires in them. They're not necessarily vampire books, but Twilight is, but they have... and Vampire Academy. They have vampires in them. I am not a lover of all of the vampire books, but I do know for a fact that they're coming back. They're coming back, and there's this new trend for vampire books. I never read the original Dracula, which I might be missing out on. I know my dad is screaming right now just thinking about that. But I definitely have a bunch that are coming up that I'm really interested in. There's The Beautiful by Renee Ahdieh. I haven't read it yet. It came out last October. It looks really cool to me. I'm really excited to read it. One came out literally this month called Crave by Tracy Wolff, and it looks really interesting to me. And another one that is one of my favorite authors, his name is Jay Kristoff. Next fall, 2021, he's coming out with Empire of the Vampires, which, wow, vampires. Who would have thought? I'm really excited for that one. I like the broad differences of vampires in literature and TV shows, and it's just, they're cool. They're just everywhere, and it's different.
So if you're craving something to read and you like vampires during this time of social distancing and isolation, feel free to check any of those books out. I'm sure Caroline recommends pretty much all of them.
Also, recommend books to me. I would love to get some of your recommendations. I'm always looking for new books, even though I got too many. Um, what about games?
Okay, so there aren't too many games that have vampires. The two that I had put down on the list were The Witcher, which I know we've talked about a lot recently, and Skyrim, which are both extremely popular games, but they both kind of take vampirism in a different way. So with The Witcher, the vampires they don't look human. Some of them do, and those are where they're called higher vampires, and they will actually look human, and then they can transform into the monster kind of thing that they are. They've got long fangs. They also have really long claws, which is a little weird.
I don't like the claw thing.
It's a little bit of a different take on vampires. And they can teleport. They can screech at you like a siren kind of can. And a lot of them are big, humbling creatures that are terrifying to look at. But they come in a bunch of different forms and varieties. There's lesser vampires, greater vampires. And when you're playing as Geralt in the game, you encounter several of them.
Some of them are friends.
Some of them are friends, like Regis. Emil Regis is one of Geralt's friends from the previous games. And in The Witcher 3, if you get the DLC expansion,
Blood and
Wine DLC expansion, you have access to see him and to encounter a lot more vampires once you get into that DLC.
Definitely recommend that DLC.
In Skyrim kind of takes a little bit of a different take as well. Skyrim is a much older game. It came out in 2009. And Skyrim basically views vampirism as a disease. So there's also a DLC to Skyrim where you encounter vampires, and you can actually become one yourself with your character, the Dragonborn. And you fight several. You have the option to become one. It's just something you can do along your journey. It gives you insane powers, and it gives you wings, which is kind of interesting, an interesting take on vampires. But I find it interesting that they view it as more of a disease.
That's kind of like what the strain does, I guess.
Rather than a curse or a transformation into another being. It's literally just a plague to them.
I just think it's interesting how in every show there's always, like, in Being Human, that's a great show. I love that show, and I can't find it anywhere anymore. But it's like even Vampire Diaries and True Blood and Being Human, the main vampire always can't control his bloodlust, or has had problems with it in the past. And why is that? And then there's always the side character that's okay and is a little bit older and knows exactly what he's doing. And that's just really interesting to me. It feels like we have these little roles that we push everybody in. But I think that's supposed to make them appear more human, make us feel better about them.
Yeah, perhaps. And I think vampires in their human form, while, most people, if you didn't know that they were a vampire at first, you'd be like, oh, they're a human. And then it's sort of like a secret identity thing. It's it's a superhero kind of thing, and they try to keep it secret as much as they can in most of these shows, because if people find out, there's generally a negative association with vampires.
Which is again where True Blood's different, because vampires are out of the coffin, as they call it.
Yeah, vampires are everywhere. Everybody knows about them,
and you can tell a vampire when they show up, right away.
It's the pale skin.
They're so pale, and I like that because they're not in the sun. And they don't do that for a lot of different things.
True Blood is literally a drink.
Yes.
It is artificial blood that is served in bars that is given to vampires.
And it comes in different blood types. So that's really cool. This is actually based on a book series that I think it's
the Sookie Stackhouse novel.
Yeah. I think it's a romance series, actually. Which is really interesting. I have a couple of them. I haven't read any of them yet, but I need to because I want to see how they line up. I love vampires.
Yes, vampires are a really fascinating aspect of science fiction and fantasy.
They're everywhere.
That are pretty much everywhere, and they've been everywhere for a while now. They were even around well before the 21st century.
Oh, yeah.
There's people certainly talking about them in in myths and legends kind of thing.
I think almost every kind of legend or mythology has a vampiric sort of creature.
Yeah, everybody talks about Dracula being the first vampire, being the most powerful vampire, the father of all vampires kind of thing. And I think that's kind of where it all stemmed. It all stemmed from that story.
I definitely agree. I think my favorite vampire might be the Vampire Diaries, which might sound stereotypical because, they're all so attractive and they're so cool and whoa, vampires. But I really do like how they turn into vampires, the process. They have to have vampire blood in their system and die and then feed on human blood in order to become a vampire. And so it's a choice. And if they don't choose that, then they die.
Yeah. I think my favorite vampire would probably be the What We Do in the Shadows vampires, just because I like them having all the stereotypes. And not only because the show is hilarious, but I just think having all the stereotypes, there's a certain element to it that makes it feel natural and correct.
So. I agree. I think it's fun. It's a fun show. These are all good shows. I like a lot of these shows.
Would recommend pretty much all of them.
I think that's all we're going to talk about tonight.
Yeah, that's going to do it for this week. So stay tuned for our next episode next week where we're going to be talking about season 1 of the Amazon Prime show, The Boys.
I love that show.
Yes, we're going to be binge watching it again so we can talk to you guys all about it next week.
This will be my 3rd time binge watching it, and I'm so excited.
All right, stay tuned for the next one, guys, and give us a listen next week.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Insert Nerd Topic Here is hosted by Caroline Vaught and Chris Rogers.
Connect with us on our social media pages. On Twitter @NerdTopicsPod. On Instagram @NerdTopicsPodcast. On Facebook, Insert Nerd Topic Here Podcast or @NerdTopicPodcast. Or subscribe on YouTube, Insert Nerd Topic Here.
Reach out to us via email at insertnerdtopics@gmail.com. New episodes release every Saturday at noon Central Time. Thanks for listening.